The year was 2387. Humanity had been a spacefaring species for exactly 140 years. Not long by galactic standards. The older civilizations, the Vorkai Empire, the Selenian Collective, the ancient and terrifying Drath Dominion, they had been sailing the stars for thousands of years before the first human ever looked up at the sky and dreamed of leaving Earth behind. Humans were the new kids. Everyone in the galaxy knew it. And most of the older empires liked it that way. They liked humans small. They liked humans confused. Furthermore, they liked humans asking permission before jumping through established trade corridors, paying tolls at Vorkai checkpoints, bowing their heads when a Selenian diplomat walked into the room. Humanity had been managed carefully and deliberately, like a fire kept just small enough that it would never burn down the house. The Vorkai Empire, in particular, had made an art of keeping humanity in check. They were tall, blue-skinned, with 4 arms and eyes that shifted color depending on their mood, gold when calm, deep red when furious. They had a saying, translated roughly into English, "A young species is a manageable species." They had been saying it about humans for 60 years. They had built their entire diplomatic strategy around it. Grand Admiral Thessaly Vorn stood on the bridge of the Vorkai command vessel Eternal Dominion and watched the sensor readouts with the kind of stillness that came only from absolute confidence. He had spent 30 years managing the human problem. He had approved the technology restrictions placed on human shipyards. Furthermore, he had personally lobbied the Galactic Compact to limit human weapons research. He had signed every agreement, every treaty, every quiet little document that kept humanity exactly where the Vorkai wanted them, behind the line looking through the fence. He was not a cruel man by Vorkai standards. He genuinely believed that limiting humanity was the responsible thing to do. Young species with too much firepower caused instability. He had seen it happen before, centuries ago with the Greth civilization. They had advanced too fast, armed themselves too quickly, and burned themselves to ash within 2 generations. He believed that humanity required protection from its own actions. So when the long-range sensor alert chimed softly on his console, he looked at it with mild curiosity rather than alarm. A human vessel had just exited hyperspace at the edge of the Cerulean Corridor, a major trade lane that cut through the heart of what the Vorkai considered their sphere of influence. Human ships passed through here sometimes, small freighters and diplomatic runners, always pre-cleared, always on schedule. Thessaly glanced at the manifest list his aide had pulled up. No human ship was scheduled today. He looked at the sensor readout more carefully. Then his eyes shifted from gold to the very first traces of orange. The ship that had just dropped out of hyperspace was not a freighter. It was not a diplomatic runner. It was not anything that matched any human vessel classification in the Vorkai database. And the Vorkai database was extraordinarily thorough. They had made certain of that. The ship was massive. Not Vorkai dreadnought massive, but larger than anything a human shipyard should have been capable of building. Its hull configuration was unlike anything in standard galactic design. Angular, asymmetrical in a way that somehow looked intentional rather than accidental, like every strange edge and odd angle had been placed there with a specific purpose. Its energy signature was wrong. Not wrong as in malfunctioning. Wrong as in impossible. The reactor output that the sensors were reading did not match any known human power system. It matched something else entirely. Thessaly leaned forward in his command chair. "Get me a full spectral analysis on that hull," he said quietly. His sensor officer, a young Vorkai named Prel, was already running the scan. Prel's eyes, Thessaly noticed, had gone orange too. That was unusual for someone Prel's age. Junior officers rarely showed visible emotional response on duty. "Sir," Prel said slowly as if choosing each word carefully, "the hull composition it appears to be laced with condensed dark matter alloy." The bridge went hushed. Dark matter alloy was not a human technology. It was barely a galactic technology. Only 2 civilizations in the known galaxy had mastered the process of weaving dark matter into physical alloy, the Vorkai themselves and the ancient Drath Dominion, whose shipyards had been silent for over 800 years. "That's not possible," Thessaly said. "Sir, I've run the scan 3 times. Thessaly stood up from his chair. He walked to the sensor console and looked at the readout himself. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked back at the strange, impossible ship sitting calmly at the edge of the corridor, broadcasting nothing, asking nothing, simply existing with a kind of quiet confidence that made something cold move through his chest. His eyes shifted fully to orange. "Open a channel," he said. 12 light-years away, on the bridge of that impossible ship, a young woman named Captain Sarah Cole was eating a sandwich. She was 29 years old, brown-haired, with the kind of exhausted eyes that came from too many 16-hour shifts and not enough sleep. She was wearing a standard United Earth Navy jacket, but she had rolled the sleeves up to her elbows because the bridge ran warm. There was a small coffee stain on her collar that she kept meaning to deal with and kept forgetting about. She looked nothing like what the Vorkai imagined when they pictured a threat. That was, Sarah had learned, extremely useful. "Captain," said her communications officer, a 26-year-old from Denver named Marcus Webb, "we're being hailed. A large Vorkai command vessel. That's the ship of Admiral Thessaly Vorn." "Oh good," Sarah said, finishing the last bite of her sandwich. "I was hoping it would be him." Marcus looked at her. "You were hoping for a Vorkai Grand Admiral?" "He's the one who signed the Meridian Restriction Act," Sarah said pleasantly, wiping her hands on a cloth and straightening up in her chair. "The one that said human shipyards couldn't build anything with a Class 7 or higher reactor core." She smiled. "I'd like him to see what we built." She smoothed her jacket. She left the coffee stain exactly where it was. "Put him on screen," she said. Grand Admiral Thessaly Vorn appeared on the view screen. Even compressed through the signal, he was an imposing figure, nearly 7 feet tall, 4 arms crossed in the formal Vorkai posture of authority, his eyes a deep, burning orange. He looked at Sarah Cole for a moment. His expression said everything. She was young. She was human. She was sitting in the command chair of a ship that should not exist, eating what appeared to be the remains of a sandwich, and she looked completely unbothered by the fact that one of the most powerful military commanders in the galaxy was staring at her. "Human Captain," Thessaly said, his translated voice deep and careful, "you are operating an unregistered vessel in a controlled corridor. You will power down your drives and prepare for boarding inspection." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "With respect, Admiral, I don't think I'll be doing that." The orange in Thessaly's eyes deepened. "This is not a negotiation." "No," Sarah agreed. "It really isn't." She let that sit in the air for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Admiral, I want to ask you something. When you signed the Meridian Restriction Act, when you personally made sure that human shipyards couldn't access the materials or designs to build anything that could challenge Vorkai military dominance, did you ever consider the possibility that we might find another way?" Thessaly said nothing. "We're creative people," Sarah said. "Always have been. You managed us very well, Admiral. For a very long time." She paused. "But you forgot something important about humanity." "And what is that?" Thessaly asked very quietly. Sarah Cole looked directly into the camera. "We don't ask permission," she said. "We ask forgiveness. And sometimes, we don't even ask that." She nodded to Marcus. "End the channel," she said. "And let's get moving. We have a lot of corridors to open today." 3 years earlier, humanity had a secret. Not a government secret. Not a military secret. Something stranger and more dangerous than either of those. A scientist's secret. The kind that starts with a single obsessive person in a room full of equations and ends with something that changes everything. That person was Dr. James Okafor. James was 44 years old, originally from Atlanta, and he had spent the last 17 years of his life doing 2 things simultaneously: working as a theoretical physicist for the United Earth Research Division and quietly, methodically, illegally reverse engineering recovered alien technology in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Titan Station. He was not supposed to be doing the second thing. The alien technology in question had been recovered 11 years ago from a derelict vessel found drifting near the edge of human-explored space. The ship had been dead for centuries, its crew long gone, its systems dark. Official analysis had classified it as an ancient draft Dominion scout vessel, catalogued its contents, and locked most of it in a restricted archive. The United Earth government, under significant pressure from the Vorkai, had agreed to limit their study of the recovered materials. James had disagreed with that decision very strongly. He had disagreed with it quietly, professionally, through every proper channel available to him. He had written papers. He had submitted formal requests. He had sat through 17 meetings with bureaucrats who smiled politely and told him the political situation was delicate and human-Vorkai relations needed to be carefully managed. Then he had gone home, poured himself a drink and started planning how to steal the data. It had taken him 2 years to copy everything he needed without triggering the archive's monitoring systems. It had taken him another 2 years to build the equipment necessary to analyze it properly. And it had taken him 4 more years, 4 years of sleeping 4 hours a night, of eating meals he didn't taste, of canceling every vacation he had ever tried to take, to actually understand what he was looking at. The draft hadn't just been good engineers. They had been operating on principles of physics that humanity had theorized but never confirmed. Their reactor technology didn't simply generate power, it harvested it, pulling dark energy directly from the quantum substrate of space itself. Their hull materials weren't just strong, they were woven through with condensed dark matter in a lattice structure that made them functionally impervious to conventional weapons. Their drive systems didn't push a ship through space, they folded the space itself, briefly and precisely, allowing movement that made standard hyperspace look like crawling. James had sat with that knowledge for 6 months before he told anyone. The person he finally told was his former graduate student, a 26-year-old structural engineer named Clara Mwangi, who was currently working at one of the largest human shipyards in the solar system and who had, on 3 separate occasions, been flagged by Vorkai compliance inspectors for exceeding recommended design complexity parameters. Clara had read James's files in one sitting. Then she had sat very still for a long time. Then she had said, "We can build this ship." "Theoretically," James said. "No," Clara said firmly, "we can build this. Give me the material synthesis equations, and I can have a proof-of-concept hull panel within 8 months. Clara, if the Vorkai find out." "The Vorkai," Clara said with a precision and coldness that James had never heard from her before, "told my father's generation that humans weren't intelligent enough to manage our own space travel safely. They told my generation we needed their guidance to develop responsibly." Her eyes were very steady. "I am done waiting for their permission to exist." James looked at her for a long moment. Then he slid the full data file across the table. That was how it started. Over the next 18 months, Clara and James built a small, deeply careful team. They chose people not just for skill but for discretion. Engineers and physicists who had all, in their own ways, quietly reached the same breaking point with Vorkai management. There was Ray Suarez, a propulsion specialist from Houston who had watched 3 of his drive designs get vetoed by Vorkai compliance officers who hadn't even read them properly. There was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a materials scientist from Osaka who had independently discovered a small piece of the dark matter lattice theory and been ordered by her institution to destroy her research. There was Lieutenant Commander Dev Patel, a retired United Earth Navy officer who had spent 12 years watching human commanders defer to Vorkai advisors in situations where every instinct he had screamed that the humans in the room were smarter. And there was Sarah Cole. Sarah had come to them sideways. She wasn't a scientist or an engineer. She had been a United Earth Navy captain, a good one with a record that had earned her a commendation and then, quietly, a forced desk assignment after she had publicly disputed a Vorkai advisor's tactical recommendation during a joint military exercise. The advisor had been wrong. Sarah had been right. A human corvette had survived because of her call. And she had been put behind a desk for 18 months for the embarrassment she had caused. Dev Patel had known Sarah for years. He had called her on a quiet evening and said 4 words. "We're building something. Come." Sarah had come. She had looked at the designs, the data, the slowly growing outline of something that had never existed in human hands before. She had walked around the early structural frames in Clara's construction bay for a long time without saying anything. Then she had turned to the group and said, "This ship needs a name." "We haven't finished building it yet," Ray pointed out. "Every ship needs a name before it's finished," Sarah said. "Otherwise it doesn't know what it's for." She looked at the angular, strange, beautiful skeleton of dark matter alloy taking shape in the bay. "We'll call it Requiem." "That's a morning song," Yuki said. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "For everything they tried to take from us." They had built the Requiem in 3 years. Not in secret from the world, that would have been impossible. But in secret from the Vorkai, which was a different and more achievable challenge. The Vorkai monitored human shipyards, but their monitoring was systematic and predictable, built on the assumption that humans would work within known technological frameworks. They checked for reactor cores above Class 7. They didn't check for reactor cores that operated on principles they didn't know existed. They checked for weapons that matched known galactic weapons profiles. Furthermore, they didn't check for weapons that had never been categorized. There had been close calls. Twice, Vorkai inspection ships had made unscheduled passes near Titan Station and James had personally spent 47 sleepless hours running decoy energy signatures. Once, a junior member of the team had talked too freely at a bar, and Sarah had spent a very intense week determining how much damage control was needed. It turned out the person he had talked to was another quietly frustrated human engineer who had immediately asked how to join. They had let her join. When the Requiem was finally complete, fully powered, completely armed, every system tested and confirmed, the team had stood together in the bay and looked at it in silence for a long time. It was beautiful. That was the word that kept coming back. Ships weren't supposed to be beautiful, they were supposed to be functional. But the Requiem was both in a way that felt almost alive. Its dark matter hull absorbed and scattered light in a way that made it look slightly different from every angle, like it existed just slightly sideways from the universe it moved through. Its lines were angular and strange and completely unlike any human or galactic vessel anyone had ever seen. James had cried, briefly and without embarrassment. He was 47 years old, and he had given 17 years to this moment, and he felt every single one of them. Sarah had put her hand on his shoulder. "Now," she said quietly, "let's go show them what we built." The first transmission from the Requiem to the Vorkai Grand Admiral had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. By the time it ended, Thessaly Vorn had already sent 3 emergency communications, one to the Vorkai Imperial High Command, one to the Galactic Compact Security Council, and one to his own intelligence chief with a single line of text that, translated from Vorkai into English, read roughly, "How did this happen, and who failed to prevent it?" But the truly extraordinary thing was not how fast Thessaly moved. It was how quickly everyone else in the galaxy moved once word got out. Because the Requiem had not simply appeared and hailed a Vorkai admiral in private. Sarah had made a choice, a deliberate, carefully considered, slightly terrifying choice, to broadcast the entire exchange on an open channel across every frequency monitored by every spacefaring civilization within range. The Galactic Compact Security Council convened an emergency session within 6 hours. The Selenian Collective sent 3 intelligence vessels toward the Cerulean Corridor within 12. The Drath Dominion, silent, ancient, terrifying, a civilization that had not made a public statement of any kind in over 200 years, sent a single encrypted signal to an address that no one in the current galactic political structure had ever seen before. That signal, when it was eventually decoded by United Earth Intelligence 3 days later, contained 7 words. "The children of our work have awakened." Nobody knew what that meant yet. But it made everyone very, very nervous. Meanwhile, on the Requiem, the crew of 47 was experiencing what Sarah privately described as the most productive form of controlled panic she had ever witnessed. Marcus Webb was managing 16 simultaneous incoming communications and doing it with the slightly glazed focus of someone who had trained for high-pressure situations but had perhaps not trained for quite this level of pressure. Ray Suarez was in the engine room running constant diagnostics, not because anything was wrong but because he simply couldn't stop. 3 years of building this thing had rewired his brain to need constant confirmation that it was real and functioning. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was in the materials lab, running a continuous scan of the hull to obtain live data on how the dark matter lattice responded to deep space conditions. The materials lab was quieter than the bridge, and as an introvert who had just watched her life's work detonate across galactic politics, she needed a place to process that. Dev Patel was standing at the tactical station, watching the sensor grid with the calm, focused expression of a man who had spent his career preparing for exactly this kind of moment and was now, at last, where he belonged. And James Okafor was sitting in the small observation lounge at the back of the ship, looking out at the stars, with the expression of a man who had finally put down something very heavy after carrying it for a very long time. Sarah found him there between briefings. "You should be on the bridge," she said not unkindly. "I will be," James said. "I just needed 1 minute." Sarah sat down next to him. Outside the viewport, the Cerulean Corridor stretched ahead of them, a route that had been controlled by the Vorkai for longer than most living humans had been alive. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked. James considered the question. "Of the Vorkai? No. Of what comes next?" He paused. "A little. Significant changes are always scary even when they're right." "The Selenians are already moving ships," Sarah said. "The Security Council is convening. Everyone is reacting exactly the way we expected them to react." "And the Drath signal?" Sarah's expression shifted slightly. "We're still working on that one." James nodded slowly. "You know what I keep thinking about? When I was a kid, maybe 9 or 10 years old, I asked my father why we needed permission from aliens to use our own trade routes. And he said, because that's just the way things are, James. That's the galaxy we were born into." He looked at the stars. "I hated that answer. I always hated it." "Good," Sarah said. "You should have." She stood up. "Come on, Doctor. The galaxy is watching. Let's give them something worth watching." The Galactic Compact Security Council met in a chamber on Valera Station, a neutral space platform positioned at the intersection of 4 major trade corridors, chosen centuries ago as a meeting point precisely because it was equidistant from nobody's home territory and therefore nobody's advantage. It had been designed for calm, measured, slow-moving diplomacy. It was not calm today. The session had been called with 6 hours' notice, which in galactic political terms was the equivalent of slamming a door so hard the walls shook. Ambassadors and representatives from 11 civilizations sat around the curved council table, and the air in the room, filtered and circulated to be comfortable for every species present, still somehow felt like it was crackling with static. The human representative, Ambassador Linda Cho, 58 years old, a small, precise woman with 20 years of diplomatic experience and an expression that very rarely gave anything away, sat at the human delegation's position and waited. She had been briefed on the Requiem 40 minutes ago. She had processed the briefing with the professional calm of someone who had learned long ago to process things quickly. She had also, privately, in the 30 seconds she had spent alone in the preparation room before entering the council chamber, allowed herself one small, quiet smile. Then she had put her ambassador's face back on. Selenian Representative Archvoice Senna spoke first. The Selenians always spoke first, they had made it a point of protocol for centuries. Senna was a towering, silver-skinned being with four-lidded eyes and a voice that resonated at a frequency designed to be simultaneously heard and physically felt. "The situation is unlike anything we've seen before," Senna said. "A human ship with an unknown military type has shown up in a controlled area without warning any member of the compact. Our initial analysis suggests that the technology on this ship is more advanced than what we officially believe humans can create." "Formally recognized," Linda repeated very neutrally. Senna's secondary eyes flickered. "Ambassador Cho, humanity has been granted developmental consideration under the Compact's Young Species Protocols. Those protocols include technology sharing limitations specifically designed to—" "I know what the protocols include," Linda said. "I helped draft the last revision of them." The room paused slightly. "Then you understand," Senna continued carefully, "that what your people appear to have done represents a significant breach of trust with the established galactic community." "With respect, Archvoice," Linda said, "the Young Species Protocols were designed to protect developing civilizations from premature exposure to destabilizing technologies. They were never meant to serve as a permanent ceiling on human development. Humanity has been classified as young for 60 years. The average developmental window cited when those protocols were written was 15 to 20 years. Silence. "We were managed," Linda said simply. "And our people found another path. That is, I would suggest, rather human of us." Vorkai Grand Admiral Thessaly Vorn, present via secure holographic link from his command vessel, spoke then. His eyes were a deep, sustained orange that had not shifted since the council session opened. "Ambassador Cho," he said with a controlled precision that carried more threat than shouting would have, "the technology on that vessel did not come from human research. The dark matter alloy hull, the quantum harvest reactor, the fold drive, these are draft technologies. Ancient, classified, restricted. Where did humanity obtain them?" Linda looked directly at Thessaly's holographic form. "From a derelict ship," she said. "Legally salvaged. In human explored space. 11 years ago. That data was restricted. By a non-binding advisory issued under pressure from your government," Linda said. "We reviewed our legal obligations carefully, Admiral. Our scientists exercised their right to study legally recovered materials." Thessaly's eyes were moving past orange and into the first traces of deep red. "That vessel," he said quietly, "represents a military capability that cannot be permitted in human hands." And Linda Cho, who had spent 20 years being calm and measured and endlessly patient in rooms like these, looked at Grand Admiral Thessaly Vorn and said something that was subsequently quoted in every news transmission across 40 inhabited systems. "Admiral, with the greatest respect, it is no longer your decision what humanity is permitted to have." The chamber was very still. Then it erupted. While the Galactic Compact Security Council descended into the most chaotic session in its 400-year history, the Requiem was quietly doing something that no one on that council knew about yet. It was following a signal. The draft signal, the 7-word transmission that United Earth Intelligence had decoded, had contained something else. Hidden beneath the surface message, woven into the signal's carrier wave with a precision that took James 3 days to notice and another 2 days to fully decode, was a set of coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a location far outside any known trade corridor, deep in the unmapped region between the Cerulean Corridor and what galactic charts described vaguely as outer boundary space. Nobody went out there. There was no reason to go out there. It had automated probes surveyed these coordinates decades ago, classifying them as empty, no habitable worlds, no significant resources, nothing of interest. James had looked at those coordinates for a very long time before bringing them to Sarah. "The Drath have been gone for 800 years, he said. Their last known installation was destroyed in the Great Collapse. There shouldn't be anything out here. And yet, Sarah said. And yet, James agreed. They had not told the Council. They had not told United Earth Command. Sarah had made that call herself with the full understanding of the crew, and it was the kind of call that could end careers, or, depending on what they found, change everything. The full drive made the journey take 11 hours instead of what would have been 3 months in a standard hyperdrive vessel. The Requiem dropped out of fold space at the coordinates and found nothing. Open space. Stars. The same quiet emptiness the probe survey had recorded. For exactly 4 minutes. Then something woke up. It came online gradually, like an enormous system powering up from a very long sleep. Sensors and fields and structures becoming visible in the electromagnetic spectrum as their power levels climbed from dormant to active. What appeared before them was not a ship. It was a station, or rather, the skeleton of one, a framework that technology had rendered completely invisible, making the Requiem's own stealth systems look like a child's attempt at hide-and-seek. It was enormous. It dwarfed Valera Station the way a mountain dwarfs a tent. And as it powered up, a transmission came through. Not on any standard frequency. It was as if the Requiem's communication systems had already known exactly how to talk to them. The voice that came through was synthetic, artificial, constructed, but there was something in its cadence that felt ancient in a way that was almost physical, like the voice carried the weight of centuries in every syllable. Vessel Requiem, the voice said. Hull composition confirmed. Drive signature confirmed. You carry the work of the Draft Dominion in your bones. You are recognized. Sarah stared at the view screen. Who are we talking to? She asked. I am Archive Mind 7, the voice said. I am the last active intelligence of the Draft Dominion. I have been waiting for the species that would find the derelict and understand what they found, rather than simply cataloging it and locking it away. You've been waiting for us? Sarah said. I have been waiting for someone who would do what you did, Archive Mind 7 said. The Vorkai found one of our derelicts 80 years ago. They cataloged it and restricted the data. The Selenians found one 200 years ago. They archived it and called it too dangerous to study. Your people found one 11 years ago, and within that time, someone looked at the data and said, we can build this. Pause. That is a draft thing to do, the voice said. We were always builders. Always. James made a sound that was not quite a word. What is this station? Sarah asked. A repository, Archive Mind 7 said. Everything the Draft Dominion ever built, ever designed, ever understood about the universe, it is here. Preserved. Waiting. For whom? Another pause. Longer this time. For whoever was willing to earn it, the voice said. And you, Captain Cole, have earned the first introduction. The station's forward bay opened. Sarah looked at her crew. Dev's hand was on the tactical console, steady. James was gripping the back of a chair with white knuckles and the expression of a man trying not to cry for the second time in a week. Yuki was already pulling up sensor arrays. Marcus had gone completely quiet. Ray Suarez from the engine room comm said, Captain? What do you want to do? Sarah looked at the open bay. At the ancient, impossible station. At the stars beyond it that humanity had always looked at and dreamed of. Take us in, she said. The interior of the draft station was not what any of them expected. They had expected cold. Metal and silence and the feeling of something long dead. They had expected the preserved ruins of a civilization, artifacts behind barriers, technology sealed behind glass, and the museum feeling of something that existed only to be remembered. What they found was warm. Not temperature warm, though the environmental systems had clicked on immediately upon entry and brought the atmosphere to a comfortable human range temperature with an efficiency that was almost eerie. Warm in the deeper sense, lived in, purposeful. Like a workshop that had been set down mid-project by someone who fully intended to return to it. The walls curved upward into vaulted ceilings that caught light and distributed it evenly throughout enormous chambers. The design language was different from anything human or Vorkai or Selenian. It was older, more confident, and built by a species that had understood its relationship with the physical world at a fundamental level and had built accordingly. Nothing was ornamental. Everything served a purpose. But everything was also, somehow, beautiful. Archive Mind 7 guided them through the entry corridor in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at once, narrating with the patient precision of something that had been waiting to tell its story for a very long time. The Draft Dominion existed for approximately 14,000 years, 7 said as they walked through the first massive chamber. At our height, we occupied 312 star systems across 4 galactic sectors. We did not conquer them. We built in them and invited others to build alongside us. What happened to you? Sarah asked. We made an error, Seven said. A philosophical one, ultimately, though it expressed itself in political terms. We believed that all intelligent species were fundamentally similar in their deepest drives, that given time and resources, every civilization would eventually reach the same conclusions about cooperation, about sharing knowledge, about building rather than controlling. We were wrong. The second chamber opened around them and they all stopped walking. It was a shipyard. Or the design archive of one wall after wall after wall of stored technical data, holographic models that activated as they moved through the space, showing ships of extraordinary complexity and variety. Some were recognizable in their basic function: carriers, explorers, and defense platforms. Many were not recognizable at all, built on design principles that made Ray Suarez walk in slow circles with his mouth open, turning and turning as he tried to understand what he was seeing. These are all draft designs? Ray said. Not all, Seven said. Many are designs developed in collaboration with other species during the height of the Dominion. We believed that shared creation produced better results than isolated development. We found that to be true in the technical sense. In the political sense, it produced complications. Because the things you built together could also be used against each other, Dev Patel said quietly. Yes, Seven said. That is a very military observation, Commander Patel. I'm a very military person. The Vorkai, Seven continued, were among the species the Drath worked most closely with in the early period. We shared much with them: reactor theory, hull synthesis, and drive architecture. They were excellent engineers, precise, disciplined, and systematic. Silence. They were also afraid, Seven said. Of us, eventually. Of what we represented. A species that gave freely, that shared without strategic calculation, that measured power not in what one possessed but in what one enabled others to build. Pause. This terrified them because it meant that power, as they understood it, was not finite. It could be multiplied indefinitely. And a species that believed power should be controlled and apportioned, that believed in managed hierarchies and developmental ceilings, such a species finds the concept of infinite, expandable power genuinely threatening. James had been quiet for most of the conversation. Now he spoke. They didn't destroy you, did they? He said. Not a question. No, Seven said. The Great Collapse was not a military defeat. It was an isolation. The Vorkai and a coalition of civilizations that shared their philosophy succeeded in cutting the Drath off, politically, commercially, and diplomatically. Gradually, over the course of 2 centuries, they constructed a galaxy in which the Drath had no allies, no trade partners, and no voice. A galaxy in which the Drath philosophy was described as dangerous, destabilizing, and extremist. Eventually we withdrew. Not all at once. Gradually, quietly, with the dignity we had always tried to maintain. We moved our people, our archives, our knowledge, to places outside the political structures that had been built to exclude us. And we waited. Sarah had been listening to all of this and had been building toward a question for several minutes. She asked it now. Why us, she said. Specifically. Why humanity? Seven was quiet for a moment. Because of what your scientist did, it said finally. Dr. Okafor did not find our derelict and secure it. He did not find it and destroy it. He did not find it and sell the information to the highest bidder. He spent 11 years of his life trying to understand it, because he believed that knowledge should not be locked away, that capability should not be artificially limited, that intelligent beings deserve the tools to be fully what they are. He did a draft thing. And then his colleague said, we can build a ship, and she did a draft thing. And then, one by one, a small group of people who were tired of being managed came together, and they built something impossible and took it into a corridor controlled by the people who had spent 60 years deciding what humanity was allowed to become. That is not just a human thing, Seven said. That is a draft thing. And I think, perhaps, that humanity and the Drath are not as different as 14,000 years of separation might suggest. James sat down on the floor of the Drath shipyard, surrounded by the designs of a civilization that had tried to build a better galaxy and been strangled for it, and he put his face in his hands. Nobody told him to get up. Back in the Cerulean corridor, things were not going well for Grand Admiral Thessaly Vorn. The Security Council session had ended, technically, but it had ended in a state of such fractured disagreement that ended was almost the wrong word. It had dissolved, like something that had been held together by surface tension and finally been disturbed too much. The 11 member states had left the chamber in 4 distinct and irreconcilable camps, and the diplomatic communications that followed had been, as one Selenian aide privately described them to a colleague, approximately the opposite of helpful. Thessaly did not have time to wait for diplomacy. He had spent 30 years managing the human problem with patience and careful strategy. He had watched that patience and strategy come undone in the space of a single conversation with a 29-year-old in a coffee-stained jacket, and the part of him that was a military commander, rather than a political operator, had shifted firmly into a different mode. The Requiem needed to be stopped. Not destroyed, that would create a martyr situation, and he was experienced enough to know that martyr situations were politically catastrophic. But he stopped. Boarded. The technology was recovered and contained. The crew was arrested and processed through the Compact's legal framework in a way that emphasized the illegal nature of what they had done rather than the remarkable nature of what they had built. He had assembled a strike force of 6 Vorkai warships, not a fleet, carefully calculated to be overwhelming but not aggressive-looking, and he had positioned them to intercept the Requiem at its last known position in the Cerulean corridor. The Requiem was not there. The absence was, Thessaly reflected, deeply annoying. His intelligence chief, Subcommander Rella, was young, competent, and currently experiencing visible distress. Her eyes had been orange since the council session. "Admiral," she said, "we have no track on the vessel. It left the corridor approximately 19 hours ago. Drive signature disappeared approximately 40 minutes out. We have no telemetry beyond that point." "It disappeared?" "The full drive, sir. It doesn't leave a standard hyperspace signature. We don't have the tracking equipment to follow it. She paused. "We never needed to develop that capability because no one had full drive technology except the Drath, and they've been gone for centuries." Thessaly stood very still. In 30 years of military command, he had learned that stillness was the most effective response to information that made you want to react. You stayed still, and you thought, and you found the actual problem rather than the surface problem. The surface problem was that he could not find the Requiem. The actual problem was he did not know where it had gone or what it would come back with. And the worst-case scenario, the one that his experience and his intelligence and the cold weight of his intuition were all pushing him toward, was that the Requiem had gone somewhere that would make the last 3 days look like a pleasant introduction. "Get me everything we have on unmapped space in the outer boundary sector," he said quietly. "Every probe survey, every anomalous reading, anything that was classified and set aside for later review." Rella looked at him. "Sir, that's everything, Rella. Today." She nodded and left. Thessaly turned back to the viewport and looked at the stars. He had spent his career believing that humanity needed to be protected from itself. He had believed that sincerely, not as a political calculation but as a genuine conviction. Furthermore, he had looked at young species throughout galactic history and seen, repeatedly, the damage that came from too much capability too soon. He had built his life's work around the idea that the Vorkai, as the elder civilization, had a responsibility to manage the pace of development. But standing in front of that viewport, with his strike force deployed in a corridor that the ship he was looking for had already left, he felt something shift, slowly, uncomfortably, the way convictions shift when the evidence becomes too heavy to ignore. He thought about the word Ambassador Cho had used. Manage. He thought about what it must have felt like from the other side. He pushed the thought away. He had a job to do. But it came back. Sarah had been in the station for 16 hours when Archive Mind 7 asked her to come to what it called the central chamber alone. Not the rest of the crew. Just Sarah. She went. Dev Patel's expression as she walked through the inner door made it very clear that he did not love this plan, and she gave him a look that said, "I know, but it's fine," in the particular shorthand that they had developed over years of working together. The central chamber was different from the rest of the station. Smaller, quieter, more intimate. The walls were covered in what appeared to be a form of recorded imagery, not screens exactly but surfaces that contained light in a way that showed moments, fragments of history. She could see faces, alien faces, dozens of species, many of which she didn't recognize, preserved in still moments that had the quality of memories rather than photographs. In the center of the room was a single piece of equipment. A chair, roughly though shaped for a body type slightly different from human. And above it, something that pulsed with a soft, steady light. "Thank you for coming alone," Seven said. "You asked me to," Sarah said. "What is this room?" "The Drath had a tradition," Seven said. When they encountered a new species, they did not offer gifts immediately. They observed first. They waited for understanding. And when they finally offered something, they offered it to an individual, not to a government, not to a military command, not to a political entity. To a person. Because the Drath believed that the most important things, The things that could change the course of a civilization should be entrusted to a person first so that person could feel the weight of them before they became policy. Sarah looked at the pulsing light above the chair. "What is that?" she asked. "The complete record," Seven said. "Not just the technical archive. Everything. Every design, every discovery, every philosophical framework, every mistake, every success, every piece of understanding that the Draft Dominion accumulated in 14,000 years of existence. Compressed into a format that a human mind can access, in stages over time so as not to overwhelm. And you want to give it to me." "I want to offer it to you," Seven corrected. "There is a difference. You can decline. You can take it and use it however you choose. You can take it and share it with your government. You can take it and keep it secret. The choice, from this point, belongs entirely to humanity." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What would the Drath want us to do with it?" she asked. "The Drath would want you to build," Seven said simply. "Not weapons. Not superiority. Build connections. Build understanding. Build the kind of galaxy where no species needs to be managed because every species has the tools to be fully itself." "That's a very idealistic goal." "It is," Seven agreed. "The Drath were very idealistic. It is in some ways what undid us. But we do not regret the goal, only some of the choices we made in pursuing it." Sarah stood in the central chamber for a long time. She thought about her father, who had been a miner on Titan Station and had told her once that the hardest thing about living in a galaxy run by older civilizations was not the rules, it was the way the rules made you feel. The way they told you, every single day in ways both explicit and invisible, that you were not quite ready. Not quite good enough. Not quite there yet. She thought about James and his 17 years of equations in a warehouse. About Clara building hull panels in secret. About Ray watching his drive designs get vetoed by people who hadn't read them. About Dev behind his desk for 18 months because he had been right. She thought about the Drath, a civilization that had tried to build a better galaxy and been strangled for it by the ones who were afraid of what a better galaxy might cost them. She sat down in the chair. "It will take time," Seven said. "The first transfer is only the introduction. But it will be enough to begin." "I know," Sarah said. The light pulsed. Anne Sarah Cole, 29 years old, coffee stain on her collar, sat in the central chamber of a Drath archive station and let 14,000 years of accumulated understanding begin to move, slowly and carefully, into human hands. Subcommander Rella had always been good at finding things. It was why Thessaly trusted her, why he had given her the intelligence role despite her youth. She had a particular quality of mind that was both systematic and intuitive, that could work through data methodically and also notice the thing that didn't fit. The anomaly. The out-of-place detail. She found it 18 hours after Thessaly gave her the assignment. In the probe survey archives for outer boundary space, buried in a batch of readings from 43 years ago, classified under the deeply uninspiring label Survey Zone 7 Gamma. No significant findings, she found an anomalous energy reading that had been recorded, noted as unexplained instrument artifact, and promptly forgotten. It had been unexplained because the probe's sensors at the time had not been sophisticated enough to properly categorize what they were detecting. They had recorded a faint electromagnetic profile that matched nothing in their reference database and therefore logged it as a malfunction. Rella looked at that electromagnetic profile with modern analysis equipment and felt something go cold in her chest. It was a Drath signature. An extremely faint, dormant Drath power signature, from a source that was being actively suppressed. Perfectly hidden unless you knew, as Rella now knew, exactly what frequency range to look in. She cross-referenced the coordinates. She looked at the trajectory the Requiem had taken when it left the corridor. She built the navigation model. Then she sat very still for a long moment. She thought about what it meant. If the Requiem had found a Drath installation, an active one, a functional one, then the 3 days of political crisis they had been managing were not the crisis. They were the introduction to the crisis. She thought about her admiral. About his 30 years of genuine belief that what he was doing was right. She thought about the galaxy as she had been taught to understand it. The Vorkai at its center, the older civilizations providing guidance and stability, the younger species developing slowly and carefully and with appropriate management. She thought about the word Ambassador Cho had used. Then she thought about what the Drath had represented. She had studied galactic history, properly, not the politically sanitized version that was standard education, but the actual academic literature. She knew that the Drath had been isolated by a coalition. She knew that the official story, that the Drath had simply declined and withdrawn of their own choice, was, at best, a simplification. She looked at the anomalous reading for a long time. Then she made a choice. She saved the analysis. She sealed it under her personal encryption. She did not bring it to the admiral. She went to the communication station instead, and she opened a private, untraceable channel, the kind that intelligence officers learned about but were never officially supposed to use, and she sent a message to an address she had quietly memorized 6 months ago, when she had started wondering whether everything she had been taught was the complete truth. The address belonged to a Selenian academic who had been quietly publishing inconvenient research about Drath history for 15 years and had somehow, miraculously, never been fully silenced. The message was short. I found the station. The human ship is there. You need to know what this discovery means before my admiral does. Please respond quickly. She sent it. Then she went back to her desk and began preparing a false report for the admiral, not one that actively lied, but one that presented the incomplete data before her analysis. Accurate as far as it went. Just not as far as it needed to go. It was the first time in her career that she had withheld information from her commanding officer. Her hands were not completely steady. But she did not undo it.